Why would you have asked for the resignation?
Because of the conclusion in the audit. I mean, we had a preliminary draft because he provided it to us. The audit committee provided it to him as the head of the agency so he could either agree, disagree, or comment or add whatever additional information he thought was appropriate. That's normal and standard procedure, as I understand it, from audit committee to any agency. He provided us, we didn't ask for it, but I was happy to get it, provided us a copy of that draft. I read the draft, I read the conclusions of the draft, and that's the conclusion I came to. So he told you the truth. My reading of the conclusions said that there were a couple people that didn't do right. That Mr. Ariza, or whatever his name is, it didn't say whether he did it intentionally or otherwise, but that he falsified documents illegally or improperly. It said that Shannon didn't have proper oversight and supervisory control over the situation. And there was all this back and forth as to whether Ariza said Shannon made him do it, or whether Shannon said Ariza didn't tell him the consequences of what was going on. Both those things are relatively I don't think you have to reach the conclusion as to who you believe to know that both of them did wrong. And so what Mr. Shannon told you about his meeting with Morrill was true, and it was occasioned by what I told Morrill.
Were you surprised by the findings of the audit, how far it went?
Yes and no. I wasn't surprised. There was a lot of anecdotal evidence, and there was all this back and forth. And I had seen the documents that were what they call the certificates of income, the income sources. And I had looked at all those documents after all this surfaced, after we sent DF&A over to find out what happened. And so I knew that they were improperly, in fact, told y'all that they were improperly using federal funds and falsifying, in effect. I didn't know whether it was negligence, sloppiness, incompetence, or intentional. But it didn't make any difference. They were misusing. I guess it makes some difference, but the bottom line was they were misusing. So from that standpoint, I wasn't surprised. The diametrically opposed testimony between Ariza and Shannon surprised me a little bit, because usually, you can reconcile. I mean, you can see where two people come to the different conclusions, looking at the same thing. This doesn't allow for that. This is diametrically opposed. The one interesting thing, though, that came out that I had not seen until I saw the preliminary on the audit was the other lady that was involved. Was it that?
Miss Edwards?
Yeah, Miss Edwards, who seemed to back up Shannon's story. It doesn't excuse Shannon, but seemed to back up Shannon's story that Ariza told her the same thing that he told Shannon.
What do you see coming out of this whole episode beyond the resignation of John Shannon?
Well, I think that some things that were suggested by audit. Audit said they didn't do anything wrong. Audit didn't do anything wrong. And that DF&A didn't do anything wrong, except that some things need to be strengthened, apparently. And from what I read about it, they suggested, and I think that DF&A will probably, in those specific agency situations where they see declining fund balances or where they see significant federal grant transfers, do more than what they used to do. And that is look themselves instead of relying as much on the agency. Although you can't do that they can't be everybody's babysitter on every aspect of a financial transaction in an agency, or else, if they're going to do that, then we don't need CFOs in the agencies. The CFOs in the agencies are supposed to do it right. It's what they get paid for, and if they don't do it right, then action needs to be taken. But I think from the audit suggestion that on a selected basis, DF&A will do more, looking more closely at certain kinds of situations that look like it might be a red flag in federal grant areas particularly.
Do you think this reflects poorly on you or your administration? The fact that
audit said it didn't.
But what do you?
No, I don't think so. I think as soon as we found out about it, we jumped right in the middle of it, and you saw what happened.
Do you think there were red flags earlier, though? You know, even though the borrowing situation wasn't quite clear, that there were other indications that this should have been looked at?
In hindsight, there was, yeah. And in hindsight, that they'd been going down for several years. But apparently, audit never found that. DF&A never found it. We obviously didn't know that they were improperly taking funds. The press didn't know it. I mean, the legislature didn't know it. You're sitting there looking at all the budgets annually every year that comes up.
But John Shannon doesn't ask to have meetings with us about his agency's fiscal situation.
Oh, I see what you're getting at. No, the meeting was not about the agency's fiscal situation. The meeting was about raising taxes. And I didn't feel like it was time to raise taxes. Now, had there been proper information about the nature of the fiscal distress of the agency, then 2 months later you're in a session, January. And you could have taken whatever steps needed to be taken had anyone known. I certainly didn't know. DF&A obviously didn't know. Our staff didn't know. And the legislature didn't know. And they're sitting there looking at the books. So from January on, during the session, had the folks known more at the time about the improper spending of federal grant monies, I'm confident that I know what we'd have done. We'd have stopped it then, as we did, 9-10 months later, when we were made aware of it. As Shannon said, he was made aware of it November of 11, I think is what he said. As soon as I found out, and what precipitated it from us was, they came and said, we're going to need a supplemental to make payroll. And I said, what do you mean, a supplemental to make payroll? And that was a surprise to me, and a surprise to our office. And then that's why we sent DF&A over there to find out why they need a supplemental to make payroll. That's when we found out what was going on. If you look back at the records, and we've gone back and looked at the minutes, a year earlier, they knew they were in trouble and that their fund balances, their trust fund was gone and had been declining and was gone. And so they took steps, which they assured us, including in the minutes their CFO assured everybody, had solved that problem. They'd cut their travel, they weren't filling vacant positions, they were taking fiscal steps necessary to right their ship. And that was, several months before they came over asking for the supplemental request. So, I mean, you'd like to have known earlier. I would have liked to have known earlier. If you'd known earlier, what would have happened would have been you'd have stopped that stuff earlier, and those people that were laid off would have been laid off earlier.
In hindsight, do you wish you'd had the meeting instead of had the meeting canceled?
No, I don't think it's the same meeting. If we'd have had the meeting and we'd have known that the meeting would have brought forth this information, you bet. But the meeting wasn't designed to. I don't think they would have come over here and admitted they were lying on their federal grant stuff. Obviously, if they'd had the meeting and they'd said, "Hey, boss, we've been lying on our federal grants, and we need you to bail us out," then it would have been good to have the meeting. If they were coming over, as I was told, and as I still believe, "Hey, boss, we need to propose a tax increase for more money for forestry," then I'd have said no at the meeting, and they'd have said no, and that'd have been the end of that story, just like it was.
Do you think it will be easier to get support for that supplemental now that this has been resolved? Now that he's resigned.
I don't know if that. I'm sure it may make a difference in some people's minds. As a practical matter, the legislature, wanted to restore as many of the firefighters' positions as is possible. I concur with that. And so a lot of work was done combing in different options to see if something other than a temporary supplemental could be found for a long-term solution for partial restoration. Once that was done, then it became pretty clear you wouldn't want to do that and then turn around and fire a bunch more people because you didn't do the supplemental. So I've been pretty confident all along that they were going to do the supplemental because they don't want any more people fired any more than anybody else does. So does this enhance it a little? Maybe.